who plays what he wants to play and says what he wants to say. Hey, hey, hey. And there goes your freedom of choice. There goes the last human voice.
2.5 minutes after the hour of 9 o'clock. 61 degrees outside under very beautiful northern New Mexico clear skies. And it's time for the continuation of the morning show and the Safety Security Show starring Carol Clark and Nancy Coon.
And this is Carol Clark from the Los Alamos Daily Post, latest online news source. The monthly Safety and Security Show is sponsored by
the Los Alamos Public Safety Association, comprised of all the officials from the areas of police, fire, lab security, FBI, and other agencies, the county's emergency management division, all the agencies that get together once a month and talk about ways to keep the community safe.
Okay, great. So Carol is going to introduce us to this month's guest, FBI agents.
We have with us by telephone from their headquarters in Albuquerque, FBI Chief Counsel Stephen Marshall and FBI Public Information Officer Frank Fisher. Gentlemen, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Carol. It's good to see you. Good to talk to you.
And Stephen, I know you because it's coming up 5 years ago now that I had the opportunity to go through the FBI Citizens Academy. I believe it's a 13-week program for regular citizens to get an opportunity to learn the various aspects of the FBI.
Yes, we're currently in the midst of our 7th academy, I believe now. So.
And I went through in the spring of 2008, and I just found it really fascinating, learned so much about the FBI. And you are basically a historian of the FBI. I know you talked a lot to the class that I was in about various historical aspects of the FBI. I wondered if you might give us just a little brief background about yourself and leading up to what led you to choose a career in the FBI.
Sure, Carol. I think like a lot of agents of our generation, we were all inspired, I think, by television and movie depictions of the FBI. I've always been a big movie fan and always been particularly a fan of FBI stories and movies, even as a kid. I recall as a child watching the FBI on Sunday nights with my father with Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. and thinking that just looked like the coolest job in the world. So I always had an interest in it from that perspective, and I've always been a big fan of history. I don't think we have any way of knowing where we're going if we don't know where we've been. So I've always been a fan of history and of the Bureau history. And I went to law school about 30 years ago, and coming out of law school, I had thought about the Bureau, but ended up taking a job as a prosecutor. So I worked as an assistant DA in Texas for about 11 years. And during that time, I got to work with FBI agents, and I was always very impressed with them and impressed with their agency. And one of the agents I worked with in particular started trying to recruit me and convinced me that I was getting close enough to the maximum age that it was time to make an effort to join. So that was about 16 years ago, and I haven't regretted for a minute the decision. I've been an agent for since 1996, and as I say, I've loved almost every minute of it. So.
And Steve, what is the maximum age to be able to become an agent?
Now it's 37, and the reason for that is we have a mandatory retirement now of 57, and you have to be able to have worked 20 years in order to retire. So you have to be younger than 37 when you start at Quantico.
So 57 is quite young.
It seems younger all the time.
Yeah, what do retired FBI agents go on and do?
It's a broad variety. We have a lot of agents, depends a lot on what they did before they joined the Bureau. I was an attorney for 11 years, so I could consider going back into practicing law. A lot of them become investigators. A lot of them run corporate security for various companies around the world. Mm-hmm. So a lot of them just decided it's time to relax and enjoy life. So.
And could you take a non-agent job within the FBI at that age, or no?
I couldn't take a bureau job, but we do have contractor positions, and that hires a lot of our people. So,
Oh, okay. Good.
we have contractors who do special investigation, special liaison work, things like that. So
Uh-huh.
that's certainly something that I would consider here as I'm getting closer and closer to that mandatory age.
Uh-huh.
But I dread retirement. I know a lot of people look forward to it, but I'm mandatory in 6 years, and that's my worst nightmare, is knowing that I'm going to have to quit doing this and do something else. So.
Well, that's because you love it so much. You know, it's very understandable. Just to a quick touch on your public information officer there, Frank Fisher. Frank, I you and I have met, and I know that you were a former journalist, and I think a bureau chief maybe for the Associated Press. Is that right?
Yes, Carol. And first, I'd like to thank you and Nancy for hosting us on this show. We always appreciate the opportunity to come out and tell the FBI story. But you are correct. I was a AP bureau chief for about 6 years.
Mm-hmm. And how do you find being in the FBI? I'm sure it's pretty exhilarating.
I'll tell you, Carol, there is not a day that I come to work that I'm not looking forward to it. It is just, this is a terrific outfit to work for. The people I work with are exciting. Everyone here believes in our mission to protect the country's security, and if I can contribute in some small way in my capacity as a public affairs specialist, I feel I've made my day.
Mm-hmm. That's great.
Can I ask you guys a kind of off-the-wall question? I read a lot of mysteries, and in the mysteries, local police departments are always getting mad because the FBI comes in and takes over the investigation. Does this really happen in real life?
I've never seen it happen in real life. Generally, what happens is it's a joint operation. Usually, they appreciate the fact that if they can get extra boots on the ground, extra help, they're usually pretty appreciative of the assistance. We have a really good relationship with the local agencies that we work with here in New Mexico. We get along really well with the local agency up in Los Alamos with Chief Torpy and his gang. So I think it makes pretty good drama, but I've never seen it work in the real world as well as it works on movies like Die Hard, where they're just looking to do battle with each other. So,
Steve, as a historian, could you maybe share just a couple of maybe little-known facts about the FBI with our listeners? Just some tidbits of info that you have about the history of the FBI?
All right. I think one thing, a lot of people don't understand that we're a relatively young agency. We've been around for 104 years, as you know, Carol, since you were at our 100th anniversary picnic a few years ago.
That's right.
If you think about the history of the country, when the country started, the biggest fear people had was a strong central government. They were afraid of another tyranny like that they'd replaced with England. So law enforcement was really a local issue. There wasn't really a national, there wasn't a desire for a national police agency or a federal law enforcement agency. And in the old days, it was workable because people didn't travel like they can today. The world was a lot bigger in a sense. And as the world got smaller, as people got the ability to drive back and forth across state lines, they found a need for a federal law enforcement agency. And there have been obviously dozens and dozens and dozens of them that have been created since then. But it wasn't until 1908 that the Department of Justice had an investigative arm. And it wasn't until the 1930s that the FBI, as we know it today, really kind of came together under the name of the FBI and given the authority and the power to prosecute criminal or investigate criminal cases. We didn't even have the authority to carry weapons until 1934. So if you look at the overall history of the country, it's been a relatively short time period that we've been involved. And as the Bureau has evolved over years, our jurisdiction has continued to expand to address the needs of the country. If you look at any major significant historical event in the country in the last 100 years, it has some way shaped the Bureau and shaped our mission. So,
very interesting. You've, as you said, you've been in the FBI for quite a few years now. Can you share with us maybe highlights from a couple of interesting cases or events that stand out in your mind?
Certainly, I think there's been a couple that have truly affected me personally. Things that I'll never get out of my head, and the most significant one is the same one that's affected most of us, I think, in the last 20 years, and that's 9/11. I remember being in Austin on that morning, and like everybody else, I remember watching the television and seeing what was unfolding. And I got a call later that morning from our evidence response team leader. We have each division has a evidence response team. Frank's a very active member of the one we have here, and on 9/11 they were calling to see who was available to go to New York, and they didn't need me on the initial call out, but they were rotating evidence response teams through New York over the next several months, and I was on one of the last rotations. They sent us to Fresh Kills, New York, which was just an awful name of a location, but it was a landfill across the river from Ground Zero, and they were transporting all the rubble from Ground Zero in barges across the river, and they would unload it at Fresh Kills, and they would take the larger items and spread them out across a field about the size of a football field, and agents would form a line and do a line search of the football field with pickaxes and shovels and whatever else they could find to look for human remains, identifying documents, any other items that might be traceable to victims. And for 2 weeks we spent 12 hours a day marching back and forth across these fields, going through concrete and rock and pieces of steel and looking for anything that could be identifiable. And the whole time you could look out across the river and see the skyline of New York and see where the tower should have been.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's one that I will never get that out of my mind, I don't think. And the thing that really got me, the one thing that really still stays with me were the fire hoses, because there were dozens and dozens and dozens of pieces of fire hose in every batch of stuff that came out, with some of them with the nozzle, some of them just segments of hose. And in my mind, as I saw these initially, I was picturing the fire hoses you sometimes see in stairwells, like for fire prevention issues, and I kept thinking of those for some reason. And it wasn't until about a week into it that we were all watching a special on HBO about 9/11, and we were watching all the video of firefighters running up the stairs with the hoses over their shoulders.
Oh, God.
And that one it's really got to all of us, I think. It just, I don't know why I was so hoping, I guess, that the hoses were already in the building. Mm-hmm. But just the feeling of seeing the looks on the faces of the firefighters who were running up the stairs knowing they weren't going to come down, and looking at all the fire hoses that were torn to pieces and that were left. That's one that I'll never forget.
I can imagine. So then, what do you do with the evidence as you find it?
If it was anything that looked like it could be identifiable for trace evidence, we would package it for DNA analysis. If it was anything with names or identifiers of that way, it would be sent off to a central location so that they could make notifications of relatives or people that might be able to identify the items. Mm-hmm. I know we found, during the time I was there, they found a piece of jawbone that identified a police officer, and that was the only thing they found that identified him. And somebody else found another fragment, I think, of a arm bone that identified his brother, who was a firefighter. Both of them died in the building. Gosh. So that was, like I said, that's one of those that'll haunt you forever. So.
Yeah, very tough assignment.
And you'd see the agents out in the field doing the searches. They were all dressed in white Tyvek suits and respirators and goggles, and it looked like it was from another world.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, I think that is, any of us that were alive during that time would just never forget it. And I can't imagine, I know how I feel just thinking about what I saw on television. I can't imagine being there in person like you were, Steve. It's just got to be unbelievably difficult.
But it's one of the nice things about this job, though, is when something like that happens, when people are standing around wondering what they're going to do about it. I think it's very rewarding to me to know that my first job is to put a gear bag together and go. Uh-huh. And I think that's one of the most rewarding things about the career, is knowing that when that kind of disaster hits, that they're going to be looking for our help. So.
Uh-huh.
Now, you're based in Albuquerque, but as you said, you get a gear bag and go. Do you travel around the country a lot?
It kind of varies. Back when I was working the evidence response team, I made a few trips. One of the other big trips we made was when the shuttle crashed in East Texas.
Mm-hmm.
I remember I got a call from my evidence response team leader on a Saturday morning, and I don't watch television on Saturday morning since I quit watching Roadrunner cartoons, I guess. But I got a call that morning from my evidence response team leader saying they may need us in Dallas. Grab a bag, be ready to be gone for 2 weeks.
Wow.
And I said, great, no problem. I said, what's going on in Dallas? He says, do you have a television? I said, yes, sir. He goes, turn it on. And he hangs up. So I turned on and was watching all the nonstop coverage of the shuttle crash. So we ended up taking off that night and spending 2 weeks doing line searches through the thicket in East Texas looking for shuttle pieces and human remains. So another one of those that you'll never forget. So.
Sure. Wasn't that a case where a lot of, maybe not a lot, but I remember hearing talk that some of the neighbors that lived in the area were kind of like, if they saw some item, they would kind of grab it and hold on to it, thinking that it might increase in value later. Did you run into any of that kind of thing?
There was some of that. For the most part, the people, though, were incredibly gracious and helpful.
Uh-huh.
I know we had, in the town I went to, a small East Texas town, we needed lodging, and they didn't have hotels enough for all the volunteers and emergency response groups. So there was a gentleman there who owned a bed and breakfast that he had just closed down because it wasn't profitable. So he went in and he opened up the bed and breakfast and gave it to the FBI for the time we were there.
Oh, cool.
And then we would go to the command post during the day to do these searches, and everybody in town was bringing us food. I think it got to be kind of a competition between all the women in East Texas to prove who could cook better than anybody else. They'd stand there and watch to see whose dessert disappeared first or whose fried chicken left first. So even though I was walking 12, 14 hours a day, I think I gained 10 pounds. But people were extremely gracious to us. They were extremely good to us. I know they did set up at one point, I thought was kind of odd, they created an amnesty time for people to turn back in whatever they had seized, the people who were souvenir collecting. And so they set up this center essentially where they would promise not to prosecute if you would bring this stuff back. And there was some guy that brought a chunk from the previous shuttle disaster from 1985. He had found a piece that had floated up to the shore in Galveston or somewhere, and he brought it and turned it in under the amnesty time, and
I'll be darned.
was assuming that that it would apply to all space shuttle crashes, I guess. But I think we were so impressed nobody ever thought to prosecute him for it. So.
So we are talking with Stephen Marshall of the Albuquerque office FBI, and his position is?
And he's the chief counsel. Isn't
Chief
that the
counsel.
proper title?
Yes.
Yes. And then Frank Fisher, who's the public information officer. You know, what you were just talking about, Steve, that really is a great opportunity, I think, for the public to see how the FBI is behind the badge, so to speak. And that's what the Citizen Academy did for me. It opened my eyes to, you got to kind of know the different FBI agents in a certain way, just as, regular people that are just as kind of, shocked as we are about 9/11 or other incidents, but they do this because they have a calling to, to help the public and so forth. So I bet those people in that community have a totally different feeling about the FBI after you all came and went.
I hope it's a positive reaction. So
I bet so. So Nancy brought up something before we started talking I thought was pretty interesting, and I just wondered about this. If somebody has a colorful background, so to speak, or maybe did something wrong in their younger years, but they've turned their life around and they want it, and let's just say they're 30 and they finally grew up and they would like to serve in the FBI, is that possible, or will you only take people that, have always had pretty stellar lives?
Well, we do have pretty strict guidelines, and one reason that we can do that is we have a lot of interest in the career. We always have a number of applicants for any opening. When I came in during a time when they were doing a lot of hiring, which probably helped me get in, but they told us at the time they were hiring 1,200 people that year, and they had about 50,000 people apply.
Wow.
So So they can afford to be pretty choosy. And every employee has to have a top secret clearance, which means that they have to have a pretty thorough background check where they talk to neighbors from everywhere you've lived in your life. They look at any public records. They look at whatever they can find out. They put you through a polygraph to make sure that you're not trying to conceal anything. But so if we're felony convictions will pretty much keep you out of the game. Certain misdemeanors, or if they're far enough back, they won't necessarily disqualify you. Limited drug use won't disqualify you if it's far enough back. But obviously anything recent or any extensive drug use will keep you out of the game. And that's one thing I always like to tell young people that are considering this in the future is bad choices today can really limit your opportunities tomorrow. So if you think that it's just a relatively minor indiscretion today, it could still come back to haunt you if it's recent enough or if it's serious enough. So if you want to keep your options open, then you need to consider those choices even at a young age.
Now, do the background checks go back 10 years, or do they go back as far as since you've been an adult?
They go back to your 18th birthday.
I'll be darned, boy.
So, and which is really kind of a challenge when you come in older like I did. I was 35 when I came in. So they send you this questionnaire that says, list every place you've lived since you were 18. And you're sitting there trying to find addresses that of an apartment you lived in law school 20 years ago.
Right, yeah.
It gets to be a pretty neat trick. Just to, had I not found an old resume sitting in a desk drawer somewhere that I'd forgotten about, I don't know where I would have come up with some of this information. But they'll go out. I've done some of the background investigations, and you find yourself going to apartment complexes trying to look for records 15 years old and looking for neighbors that might still be there. And of course, nobody ever stays there that long.
Right.
So, but you're trying to track down. You go to every house they ever lived in, every apartment they ever lived in, and you talk to the neighbors and you talk to the landlords and you check every credit history and every issue that comes up. I remember the one that I had issues with on mine. They sent it back and told me to keep working on my background because I'd done a clerkship for a law firm in Fort Worth, and I'd lived with an aunt and uncle for 6 weeks during this clerkship, and they needed that address where my aunt and uncle used to live so they could go talk to the neighbors to see if anybody remembered me having lived there 15, 20 years ago for 6 weeks.
Boy, that is thorough.
Yeah, they don't miss much. So.
This is, we're talking with Stephen Marshall, who's Chief Counsel of the Albuquerque Office of the FBI, and Frank Fisher, the Public Information Officer. Now, Steve, you mentioned that you were on the evidence response team. Can you just kind of overview some of the other positions in the FBI?
Well, we have as agents, everybody is pretty much similarly trained as a special agent. Then we have specialties for different squads. We have cyber agents and foreign counterintelligence agents and terrorism agents, criminal agents, obviously. But we also have a number of non-agent positions, professional staff, such as Frank's position as a media person. We have community outreach people. We have paralegals. We have various other specialties in that regard. And then we have collateral duties that we can do on top of that. And one of those collateral duties, like I said, is the evidence response team. That's something that Frank's recently become a member of and is very active with. We have agents comprising of collateral duty as a SWAT team. We have agents that do firearms training as a collateral duty. So in addition to the primary responsibility, there's tons of other opportunities to get involved in other things.
And I wanted to ask you, Steve, remember the little dog that a couple of the FBI agents found on the Indian reservation?
Rocco. I thought you might ask about Rocco.
How is Rocco?
Rocco is great. Rocco is now a big city dog. He went from being a reservation dog who didn't have any chance at all of survival after being attacked probably by coyotes to being rescued by a couple of our agents and adopted by another agent, and she got transferred to Philadelphia. So Rocco is now a big city dog and doing great.
So the FBI was called out after a coyote attack? I mean, there must be more story there.
No.
We had a couple of our employees who were dog lovers driving across the reservation for another call-out, and they saw a dead puppy laying in the middle of the road, and they thought it was really sad as they were driving around it. And one of them looked up in the mirror, and the dog raised its head as they drove off, and they realized it wasn't dead. it just looked dead. So they looped back around and grabbed it immediately and took it to a vet who had been in our Citizens Academy, and the vet managed to save the leg that had been chewed up pretty bad. And I took the puppy for about 2 weeks and put about 10 pounds on it, and then we gave it to one of our young agents, Mackenzie, who graciously agreed to adopt him, and she still has him. She says he's still her best friend, although he's gone from the 7 pounds when we rescued him to about 65 pounds last I heard.
Oh,
so
my gosh.
He's a big puppy now, so.
That's
but he's living the high life in Philadelphia. He's got his own little townhouse and a nice little yard, and occasionally still goes out on call outs. His person, Agent Mackenzie Monarca, was a surveillance specialist for a while, and she would take Rocco with her when she'd go out on surveillance, and he makes a nice cover. So.
I bet.
Well, we just have a couple of minutes left. Can you tell us a little bit about the Citizen Academy that Carol attended?
It's a program. It meets once a week on Tuesday nights for about 4 hours, for about 8 weeks, I think is the current time. We bring in people from throughout the community, from areas of journalism or law or medicine or other community activists. We bring them in, and every Tuesday night we'll do a series of presentations trying to expose them to every aspect of the Bureau, everything that we do. I do a presentation on the history of the Bureau. We have the people that work the terrorism and the cyber crimes and all the other various specialties come in and talk to them. And we go out on a Saturday morning and go out to the range and let them test fire the various weapons that we've been assigned over the last 100 years. And just kind of give them a good exposure to what we do and give us a chance to meet people in the community that we can talk to if we need information or help in the future. We can contact these people that are kind of the voice of the community.
And I highly, highly recommend it. It was one of the coolest things I've ever done, and but I believe you have to be recommended by somebody that's gone through the academy before. Is that true, Steve?
Right, either an employee of the Bureau or an alumni from the academy.
Alumni recommended me, Robert Hull, who works up here for Los Alamos Technical Associates, and boy, it was very cool. I remember I was even down in El Paso for the day of one of the meetings that was going to occur that night, and I did not want to miss it. I drove up from El Paso to Albuquerque, attended the meeting, and drove back to El Paso.
So listeners, if you're interested in the Citizens Academy, you got to talk to Carol Clark and convince her that you're worthy, so she'll recommend you.
Well, thank you both for joining us. It was great talking to you and learning a little bit more about the FBI and all the great things that they do for the country.
It was our pleasure. Thank you for having us.
Thanks.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Nancy.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.